So here we are once again, the Brattlecast, exciting stories about books, old, new, rare, out of print, you name it. And of course, with me is Ken Gloss of the Brattle Bookshop in Boston on West Street. As we said in the previous episode, Ken, you're not always in the store. In fact, you're on the road a lot. If you're not giving talks and lectures and interesting panel discussions and all that, then you're out looking to buy and looking to find more books for the store. So we talked a little bit about an adventure in New Hampshire. Now let's talk about an adventure in Waltham, Massachusetts, involving a storage area, storage bin.
Well, and quite honestly, for the business, going out to the houses, the estates, the storage units, whatever, it's the treasure hunt. That's one of the most fun parts about the business is it's the treasure hunt. In any case, this story started before the pandemic. It started 6-7 years ago, and I got called out to a storage unit. There was a man who was moving out of his house, maybe not necessarily because he wanted to move out of his house, but he had to move out of the house, age, frailty, and so on. And he had a lot of friends who, though, were good friends and helping him. And they moved some of his furniture and a lot of books to a storage area in Waltham, Massachusetts. And they called me out, and it was almost impossible to look at every book in every box because the boxes were like 8 deep, 8 feet high, 10 or 12 across. And what you do in a case like that is you sample. You climb in, you get there, you look, you see what this book looks like, you see what that box looks like, see what type of items they have. Also, you ask, is there anything that they know is particularly high-priced, rare, valuable? A lot of times there's 1 or 2 books that can be worth more than everything else combined. And they said, no, a lot of good history, a lot of good background material. They also said there was a lot of ephemera, postcards, advertising cards, old diaries, letters and notes about different towns. And fortunately, those were in different types of boxes, so I could tell which was which. We looked. I discussed the price, and they seemed interested, but they said, well, we've got to check with the owner. They seemed happy with the idea. And I thought, yeah, it seems good enough. We didn't get all the way into the back of the group, but I actually saw the ephemera. I thought was more interesting than a lot of the books. A lot of the books I felt, other than a few, were going to go on our outside $3 and $5 tables. They'd get sold there, they'd get bought, but a lot of them were a little bit out of date. They were on subjects that you can look up on the internet now. But we made an overall offer, and the people seemed happy with it. They said they'd get back to me within a few weeks, and I said, that's fine. I said, I'd rather have everybody think about this, decide whether they want to do it or not do it, than do it quickly and get a call a month from now saying, I want this back or that. I said, it's perfectly understandable. And I said, a lot of times the hardest part is this gentleman who I guess knew me. I didn't quite know him. What happens a lot at the store, is that I know people, but I don't know their name necessarily.
Yeah, well, they know you because of your role and position, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, but I said I want to make sure that he'd be happy. And after about 2 weeks, I called back. I said, "Was there any progress? We have a few other buys coming up. This is going to be 3-4 truckloads of books. And, I want to do it efficiently." And they said, well, no, we've got to wait a little while. I said, fine, call me. Usually a 2-week lead time will, enough so we can do it. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, they said he just can't let them go. He wants to keep them. He wants to have them. he thinks that when he gets back into his house, that he's really going to want them. I could tell by the way they were talking, when he thinks he's going to get back in his house is probably never, which happens a lot, unfortunately. And I know that in itself is a difficult part. So anyways, I said, fine, let me know when you're interested. And I get a call 5 or 6 years later that they said, do you remember the books in the storage area in Waltham? And they said, well, it's at the point now where they have to be sold. And I said, fine, I'll come back out. I went back out. It looked exactly the same. I said, I'll give the same price. I said, the unfortunate part about all this is I am sure that you spent more money on the 5 or 6 years of storage unit than what I'm paying.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, but it was, and they said, absolutely. And they said, it was an emotional hardship. And I said, it's just such a shame because, here we are 6 years later.
But as you
paid
said,
a lot of money.
As you said in previous episodes, we've talked about this, the attachment that people have to things, particularly books more than other things, is very, very deep and personal and emotional, and especially for an elderly person whose life is being taken away, in a sense, is independence, something very, very sweet about that. But you're right, the cost of a storage unit, I think I was paying $300 a month at one point for one of my units, and boy, it was nice to not have to pay that ever again.
Well, I think one of the things that I tell people when you deal with storage units, probably storage unit people don't want me to say this, in most cases, in almost all the cases, you're probably better off throwing everything away and then buying it all again new than paying the storage fees. Matter of fact, when we buy large libraries, there are times when we can't get it all into the store or we've got to get it out of the house quickly. There are many times we'll say we're going to use a storage unit. When we're figuring what we're going to pay for the lot, we figure, okay, there's going to be 6 months of storage unit, $300 or $400 a month. That's figured into the bid. But that storage unit is going to be empty in 6 months.
Here's a question for you, too, a more practical question. And I guess it depends on the storage unit you work with. But the condition of books, if kept for years in a sealed place like that, what happens to books? Anything?
Well, you
negative?
Actually are jumping ahead to the next part of this podcast.
Oh.
I'll explain.
You want to tease? Go ahead.
Everything didn't happen quite the way we suspected. But when I made the offer, probably 80%, 70 to 80% of the offer was I liked the ephemeral items much more than I liked the books. And, all of it seemed fine. And the ephemeral items came out and we got those. And then we got 2 truckloads of books out. Everything looked fine. But when we got the books to the store, we started opening up the boxes and they looked good. But a lot of times when things get damp, especially with books, it actually mold forms underneath the dust jacket. The dust jacket looks fine, but it forms underneath it. And so we started saying, well, okay, this box of books isn't good. That box of books isn't good. This one. And we ended up throwing away about 75, 80% of the books because they were either damp, moldy. I was saying to myself, that storage area was a good storage area. It didn't feel damp. It didn't feel like there was any problems. So I called the people up and I told them that, we've been throwing away a lot of the books. And I said, I'm not going to change the price because the ephemera actually seemed fine. And I said, that will make up. There was a few things that showed up within those boxes that would make up for the damage. But I said, when I come back, there's another truckload or more to come back for. And I'm not going to take the books if they're moldy. I don't want them to get into the store. But the other side of that, I said to them, is the dumpster that they went in, that cost like $500.
Mm.
And then, and I'm going, this just doesn't make sense. When I went back and they said fine, and there was another person there, he said, well, yeah, there was a problem. He said, one of the things that forced this move initially was that there was a flood in the basement.
Okay.
And so I don't think these books were necessarily the ones that got flooded, but the house must have been incredibly damp. And we went through the rest of the books. So even though we tried to check, we opened the boxes, we looked in, we initially said, these look fine and good. When we started looking under the dust jackets, we had to get rid of them. Now, I felt bad for the people that were helping, because one of the things they wanted was me to take everything out of there and then never have to look at it again. But they were very nice people. They agreed that they would dispose of the book, so I didn't have any extra costs there. The ephemeral items turned out fine, so it worked out well. But the really sad part about all of this was that the extra 6 years of the storage area, but it also shows that you can be surprised. The storage area didn't damage the book, so they can't say, oh, a pipe broke in the storage area. But because the books were damp when they came in, and you close them up and seal them in boxes, they don't get an airflow when they're piled and stacked, that the mold and the dampness just sort of grows over the years.
And the last thing you need is to bring that into the store and infect other books.
We don't want to do that, and I don't want the extra work. It was disappointing, but it's one of those things. In the long run, business-wise, it worked out. It would have been better if the books hadn't gone in there. But it's just, again, the situations you run into, and then the unexpected turns that things can make. And when you're dealing with lots of people, lots of houses, lots of books, you try to have everything go straightforward. Most times they do. But one of the things that I look at with this is it's another story. And I like collecting stories.
You do, and that's the thing about buried treasure. It's never easy, but it's certainly fun going after it. You've been listening to the Brattlecast with Ken Gloss. I'm Jordan Rich, and we're going to take a look at what your week is like, a week in the life of the Brattle Bookshop, when we return with our next episode. Ken, as always, thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you, and hey, storage your units, be careful.